BBC News at 10 o'clock. King Charles is due to make his first visit to Parliament as monarch shortly, where MPs and peers will offer their condolences. Along with the Queen Consort, Camilla, he will fly to Edinburgh later to take part in a series of events honouring Queen Elizabeth, whose body will be taken from the Palace of Holyrood House to the nearby St Giles Cathedral. She'll lie at rest there for 24 hours so the public can pay their respects before her coffin is moved to London. Our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, is at Clarence House, where the King is due to depart.
The first half is here in London, in England, and the second half, after they fly up, that's the King and the Queen Consort, up to Edinburgh, where he's got a very choreographed day. He'll be leading the procession, the royal procession, down the Royal Mall from Holyrood House to St Giles. There'll be a service, then he'll be meeting the Scotland's First Minister, and then the Scottish Parliament, and then there'll be a vigil. I mean, it's an exhausting day, but they've rehearsed for this, and security, of course, as you can imagine, is going to be pretty tight.
People planning to file past the late Queen's coffin in Westminster Hall, where she'll lie in state from Wednesday evening until the funeral on Monday, have been warned to expect long queues. In the past hour, the Duke of Sussex has paid tribute to his late grandmother, calling her his guiding compass. In a written statement, Harry describes his smile, knowing she and Grandpa are reunited now and both together in peace. In other news, Britain's economy grew by less than expected in July. Figures from the Office for National Statistics show GDP expanded by 0.2%, following a fall of 0.6% the month before. And Ukraine has accused Russia of targeting civilian infrastructure in retaliation for Kyiv reclaiming territory in the east of the country. Moscow denies the accusation. Ukraine's armed forces have seized back dozens of villages and towns. BBC News.
You're listening to BBC Radio 4, where we now take you to Westminster Hall in central London for the Motion of Condolence with Martha Carney.
Hello. Over the next hour, we're going to witness the first coming together of the new sovereign and Parliament. King Charles III is due to arrive shortly at Westminster, where he and the Queen Consort will hear motions of condolence from speakers of both houses. He'll then deliver a highly anticipated speech, which should give us a real understanding of the new monarchy. All of this is taking place in the ancient heart of Parliament, the magnificent Westminster Hall, which dates back to the 11th century and has been the site of so many glorious occasions and power struggles, we have to say, in the history of our country. Think of the trials of William Wallace, Guy Fawkes, and our new king's namesake, Charles I. His relations with Parliament didn't end particularly well with that beheading. Now, it may seem as if today's ceremony, with its fanfares and trumpeters, has its origins in the mists of time. But our researchers discovered that this has actually never happened before. Like many others, this is an invented tradition to keep with the times. In the past, after accession, parliamentarians went to the palace to deliver their addresses. Now King Charles is coming to them. Perhaps he's sending a signal. It was Winston Churchill who presented the Commons' address to Queen Elizabeth. He said she comes to the throne at a time when a tormented mankind stands uncertainly poised between world catastrophe and a golden age. Today is the latest chapter in the transition from Queen to King. After this speech, the King will be travelling to Edinburgh to process behind his mother's coffin, where the lying in rest begins at St Giles Cathedral. Later this week, the coffin will be taken to Westminster Hall, where perhaps as many as 1 million people will come to pay their respects. Well, let's take you inside Westminster Hall now, where our political editor, Chris Mason, is going to guide us through the morning's events. Tell us what you're seeing right now, Chris.
Good morning to you, Martha, from the splendour of the oldest part of Parliament, the oldest part of the Palace of Westminster. This a home of history, as you've been reflecting. Henry VIII's coronation banquet in 1509, the trial of Guy Fawkes in 1606. This morning, it's the latest staging post, the latest landmark in the choreography of constitutional ritual, and at its heart, the King, personifying continuity and grief. In front of me, row upon row of blue chairs, upon them an audience of around 900 in black. I'm at the back looking down on Lords on the left, MPs on the right, and in front of us all the stained glass window of St Stephen's Porch right at the back of the hall. You can hear the footsteps right now of the King's bodyguard, of the yeomen of the guard, who are just heading down the central aisle towards the two main unoccupied seats at the front, which will be occupied in the next 10 minutes or so by the King and the Queen Consort.
We'll be returning to you for those speeches shortly, but let's talk to our royal correspondent Johnny Diamond, who's in Edinburgh. And Johnny, this is where the King will be going later today as part of his tour of the capitals.
That's right, Martha. And here in Edinburgh, there'll be a mix of the high ceremonial, the deeply personal, and what you might call the state institutional. After the King leaves London, he'll come to the Scottish capital and to the Palace of Holyrood House, where the Queen has lain overnight in the throne room. Joined by his brothers and sister, he will walk behind the Queen's coffin down the Royal Mile through the ancient heart of this capital city to St Giles's Cathedral. There'll be a service in that cathedral, and the crown of Scotland will be laid upon the coffin of the Queen. Then will come the state institutional side. He will meet various political leaders, including the First Minister, leaders of opposition parties, and then the Prince will go to the Scottish Parliament. He'll receive there a motion of condolence and will reply to that motion, and then he will return to St Giles's Cathedral, where he will begin a 24-hour vigil around the coffin of his mother.
Johnny, thank you. We have other guests who are going to be guiding us through the events and the meaning of the next hour. Let's begin with Professor Robert Hazel from the Constitution Centre at University College London. Good morning. I think we can safely say that the relationship between monarch and parliament has changed hugely since Westminster Hall was built, I think under the reign of William Rufus, the son of William the Conqueror. Just explain to us what the constitutional significance is of today.
I think it can be summed up in 3 words, Martha, that we are ruled by the Crown in Parliament. But ever since the 17th century, we've had a constitutional monarchy, and the King reigns with the consent of Parliament and subject to laws passed by Parliament. I think it's not sufficiently understood how tightly the monarchy is regulated by law. We've seen that in evidence just in the last few days. For example, the rules of succession to the Crown have been changed 4 times in the last 300 years or so, most recently in 2013.
To allow a woman to inherit
Indeed,
it.
the Succession to the Crown Act of that year. So when Charles was proclaimed the rightful and lawful liege lord, he was the rightful and lawful new king under laws passed by Parliament. I'd say just one more thing about today's ceremony. Strictly, it's not a meeting of Parliament. It won't be recorded in Hansard. But the new king clearly felt it was very important early in his reign to meet with Parliament. And in effect, for me, I think he's symbolising his recognition of the supremacy of Parliament in our parliamentary system of government.
Yes, he's doing it publicly. He's coming to Westminster Hall, not behind closed doors in a royal palace. For the moment, thank you, Robert. Let's bring in my other guests now. Lord Mandelson, Cabinet Minister, of course, in the last Labour government, who is one of the 200 senior politicians at the Accession Council on Saturday, which was addressed by the King. And we're also joined by the former Conservative MP and Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Let me begin with you, first of all, Peter Mandelson. Westminster Hall is a special place, isn't it, for politicians? Of course, it's imbued with history, but also a place where we've seen addresses from Nelson Mandela, Barack Obama.
Yes, it's a tremendous coming together this morning of both houses of Parliament, as we've done on occasions in the past. The Accession Council itself was rather different, rather more limited. In times past, all the Privy Councillors have been invited to attend. On this occasion it was restricted to only 200. I'm afraid that Privy Councillorships have been dished out so sort of liberally over the years that there are so many of them they couldn't all pack into St James's Palace. But this gives an opportunity for everyone, every MP, every peer, to demonstrate and cement, in a sense, the loyalty and the respect that each has for the other, Parliament and King, because as Robert Hazel has said, the King is the sovereign, but Parliament is sovereign in the sense that The King simply signs acts of Parliament which have been agreed by both houses.
And we've seen, George Osborne, haven't we, in recent days, many tributes in Parliament to the Queen, which a lot of people are saying this is Parliament at its best when party politics are put to one side.
I think it is a Parliament in one of its great states. I actually think, obviously, Parliament is also a place where you resolve difference. So we shouldn't dismiss the times when there are more heated debates. I think, obviously we have a constitutional monarchy, and Parliament has, over the centuries, altered who sits on the throne. And you could argue the Queen would never have been on the throne if Parliament and the Prime Minister at the time had not pushed for the abdication of her uncle. So Parliament is obviously in that sense supreme. But I would say, as someone who sat in the House of Commons, it was the state opening of Parliament, the Queen conferring legitimacy on the proceedings, that also meant that Parliament as an institution was somewhat protected from whoever was the government of the day and whatever the political controversy of the day. There's a sense that the institution itself is timeless, and that it derives authority from a monarch who is above the political fray. So it's a constitutional monarchy in which both sides, I think, gain legitimacy from each other.
How do you, Peter Mandelson, see that relationship between monarch and Parliament?
One of deep, deep respect for our respective roles. I think George makes an important point here. Labour and Conservative can disagree on almost any and every issue. The one thing they don't disagree about is the institution of the monarchy. The Labour Party is a modern patriotic party, and I remember the photograph of the then Queen returning from Kenya in 1952 after the sad death of her father, standing shoulder to shoulder at the bottom of the steps when she arrived back at the airport were Winston Churchill, new Prime Minister, and Clement Attlee, the leader of the opposition, who had been Prime Minister from 1945. And you could fast forward that 70 years and you will see now today Liz Truss, Keir Starmer sitting together, demonstrating that on this most important part of our parliamentary democracy, which is underpinned by the monarchy, there is no division between the parties at all. And I think that in the Labour Party, that affection that has existed for the Queen over the last 70 years, and it's very deep amongst sort of Labour's rank and file, as it is in the population as a whole, will be transferred to King Charles, partly because of belief in and commitment to the institution, but also because of his personality. I think that he has struck people during his time as Prince of Wales as somebody who genuinely cares about the condition of his people. He observes, he understands, he speaks, he acts. Now he'll be doing rather less of that now as king, but I think that has struck very deeply amongst people in the country as a whole.
And George Osborne, I suppose as Chancellor of the Exchequer, you would have had dealings with Prince Charles as he then was, I think particularly over finances at one point.
Yes, well, actually, a little-known part of being Chancellor of the Exchequer, so little known that I didn't actually know about it when I was Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, is that you are Treasurer of the Royal Household, one of three, the other being the Prime Minister and someone that the Queen appoints, the Keeper of the Privy Purse. And the Prime Minister delegates functions to the Chancellor. So I actually had a lot of dealings directly with Her Majesty the Queen and with the Prince of Wales over the royal finances. And we, under the government I was part of, we actually changed the way the royal finances were calculated to move away from a system that had essentially run out of money called the civil list, something called the sovereign grant. And what was interesting is, as a parliamentarian, as an MP for many years before I became Chancellor, you didn't actually have anything directly to do with the royal family. You would see the Queen at the state opening of Parliament, or maybe one of the members of the royal family would come and open something in your constituency. I was rather struck on joining the government, and as I say, I hadn't really expected it, that you are very intimately involved with the royal family in its official capacity, and both in the case of the monarch, but also actually with the Duchy of Cornwall as Chancellor. And so I had a lot of exposure, which I regard as one of the kind of great if you like, privileges of the job directly with the Queen. It was an absolutely remarkable person, as everyone has been saying, but also with Prince Charles, who I think also is a remarkable person in a different way and has had many years to think about this role. And I think will bring, he brings a kind of generational sensibility and a concern about certain issues, which I think have come into their own over these decades, like the environment, like the role of business in society, and the sort of broader, impact on society that organisations can have. And through his charities, which now obviously he won't be directly involved in, but as monarch, I think he will bring that kind of contemporary sensibility. And I'm not someone, having dealt with him a lot over the years, who's concerned he's going to, as some people think, meddle in politics or he's too political. I don't think that's right. I think he has a very, very keen awareness of his proper function. And I think he will take on this role in a different way to the way his mother conducted it impeccably over the decades.
Well, we should say the King is on his way to Westminster Hall now. He has, in fact, left Clarence House. And Peter Mandelson, would you agree with that assessment of how you think the King is likely to behave? I mean, we didn't know anything about the Queen's political views, did we? We knew a great deal about what Prince Charles, as he then was, thought about things. Did you have experience of that in government at all?
Like others, I had much experience of being on the receiving end of his views and his letters.
The famous Black Spider
which
memos.
were always impeccably argued, with great respect. Would the government like to consider this, or is the government aware of that? And perhaps we might discuss this on a particular occasion. I didn't find it intrusive at all. I found it rather impressive, quite honestly, that he as a very hard-working and sympathetic individual, he looks around him, he understands, and I think that his particular interest in young people, in their housing, their diversity through the Prince's Trust, all of our environment, and in the state of inner city living. I mean, he's a person who tends to think broadly and deeply, but in the long term. Sometimes politics, can become rather more short-term and transactional. So introducing that dimension that he brought to the discussion actually was often quite times very useful.
Well, let me bring Professor Robert Hazel back in now. Will it be spelt out to him very clearly what the boundaries are? I mean, he's talked about, I know my life has changed. His friends have said he knows the rules.
I think it will, Martha, and none of us will know for certain, but if he continues to write Black Spider memos to individual ministers, my own hunch is that the Prime Minister will say tactfully but firmly at one of their weekly audiences, "Sir, now that you are king, you do have one main point of contact and communication with the government."
And that's me, the Prime Minister.
With me, the Prime Minister, at our weekly audience. Yeah. Martha, could I just say two more things briefly? Cut me off if you need to. When George Osborne was talking about how the royal finances were changed just 10 years ago, he was referring to the Sovereign Grant Act, which he piloted through Parliament. It's another illustration of how the monarchy is tightly regulated by laws passed by Parliament, and Parliament, in that law, completely changed the funding of the monarchy. Secondly, looking at the ceremony that we're watching, it's a wonderful combination of ancient and modern. So just a few minutes ago, the mace of the House of Commons and the House of Lords was covered, because the mace is the symbol of royal authority in Parliament. It's the symbol of the crown in Parliament. But the crown is now, here he is, we can see on our screens, arriving, and therefore, because the crown will be present in Parliament, the mace is then covered.
Well, as the King and Queen consort arrive inside Westminster Hall, let's go back to Chris Mason.
So yes, the King and the Queen consort arriving here in Westminster Hall as the audience rise to their feet and they head down the central aisle. They're being led by the Lord Great Chamberlain, an ancient role, hereditary officer of state to whom the sovereign entrusts the custody and control of a significant part of the Palace of Westminster. Lord Carrington, the occupier of that role. At the moment, heads turning as the royal party head down the central aisle of Westminster Hall towards the two chairs. In the few moments whilst they were travelling to Parliament, we had the processions of the Lord Speaker and the House of Commons Speaker, Lord McFall and Sir Lindsay Hoyle, respectively, who we'll hear from in just a few moments as the King and the Queen Consort climb the few steps up to the seats that they will shortly take. The address is being prepared on the lectern, the King wearing a morning suit, both he and the Queen Consort taking their seats now. And the congregation taking their seats as well. In front of the microphone now, Lord McFall of Alcluith, the Lord Speaker. Former Labour MP, became a peer in 2010.
Your Majesty, I welcome you and Her Majesty the Queen Consort to Parliament today on this solemn occasion. Her late Majesty, our treasured Queen, and your beloved and deeply missed mother came here to Westminster Hall many times to receive the congratulations of her loyal subjects in the two Houses of Parliament and to celebrate with them historic landmarks and her long life of dedicated public service. She was both a leader to and a servant of her people. Her humility and integrity commanded the respect and captured the imagination of peoples and nations across the globe. Her late Majesty's joyous, unstinting and reassuring presence across the years made it difficult to contemplate that her long and inspiring reign of deep and unparalleled devotion would ever end. We and the nation closed our eyes to this inevitability. But it has ended. Only a few months after we celebrated Her late Majesty's historic Platinum Jubilee. And as you said so movingly, Your Majesty, in your address to the nation, we all now feel a sense of loss beyond measure. Nevertheless, the qualities that Her late Majesty embodied with such constancy remain to inspire you, Your Majesty, your family, and all your subjects. We remember her commitment, her kindness, her humour, her courage, and her fortitude, as well as the deep faith which was the anchor in her life. Your Majesty, this is a historic space. Its walls built more than 900 years ago by William Rufus, and the magnificent hammer beam roof above us, commissioned 300 years later by Richard II. Since medieval times, much of our national story has taken place within these very walls, from civic gatherings to coronation banquets to the centuries during which this hall was at the heart of our legal system. But this ancient hall is a living space, and like our great nation, it continues to evolve. In 2012, Her late Majesty came to Westminster Hall to mark her Diamond Jubilee, and we saw the unveiling of the splendid memorial window commissioned by both members of Parliament's houses, which now graces the north wall of this historic space. And now, for 10 years, the light from that window has added beauty to the grey stones of this place, bathing them in colour and reminding hundreds, nay, thousands, millions of visitors to the Palace of Westminster of Her late Majesty's dedicated life of service. Like the light that shines through this memorial window, Her late Majesty's magnificent achievements will live on by permanently illuminating and enriching our lives and our national discourse. Your Majesty, even as we mourn the loss of our dear Queen, we and future generations will draw strength from her shining example. Your Majesty, on behalf of all the members of the House of Lords, I pledge my loyalty to you and wish you and Her Majesty, the Queen Consort, well in the life of service to which you have dedicated yourself. We are proud and indeed humbled to welcome you as our King, and we look forward to welcoming you on many more occasions to Parliament and to this hall in the years ahead. Finally, Your Majesty, the House has commissioned me to deliver the following humble address, which their Lordships agreed on the 10th of September. I shall now read the address. Most gracious Sovereign, we, Your Majesty's most dutiful and loyal subjects, the Lords spiritual and temporal in Parliament assembled, beg to leave to convey to Your Majesty the deep sympathy felt by this House in the grief Your Majesty has sustained by the death of our late beloved Queen, Your Majesty's mother of blessed and glorious memory. To extend to all the royal family the deep sympathy of this House in their grief, which is shared by all members. To assure Your Majesty that the example of selfless public service, which our late Sovereign displayed over her reign of 70 years, her untiring endeavours for the welfare of her peoples, and her fortitude in adversity will ever be held in reverent, affectionate and grateful remembrance. And to express to Your Majesty our loyalty to Your Majesty's royal person and our firm conviction that under the blessing of divine providence, Your Majesty will, throughout your reign, further the happiness and protect the liberties of all your peoples in all your realms.
The Lord Speaker, Lord McFall there, presenting the humble address, has a black band around the A4 piece of paper, black calligraphic writing upon it, the King handing it to a member of staff. And we hear next from the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle.
Your Majesty, let me repeat our welcome to you and to Her Majesty, the Queen Consort. On this solemn occasion, members of both Houses of Parliament gather here to express our deep sympathy for the loss we have all sustained in the death of our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth. We have seen that this is a loss that is felt around the world. It is a loss to the United Kingdom, the overseas territories, the Crown dependencies, and many countries over which she reigned. It is a loss to the entire Commonwealth, which she did so much to nurture. It is a loss to all of us, but we know, most of all, it is a loss to you, Your Majesty, and to the royal family. Newspapers have been filled with photographs of Her late Majesty since the news broke. The most touching have been the glimpses into the family life which we usually kept sheltered from public view. Deep as our grief is, we know yours is deeper. We offer our heartfelt sympathy to you and all the royal family. We know that there is nothing we can say in the praise of our late Queen, your mother, that you will not already know. Over the past days, members of the House have spoken of their encounters with Queen Elizabeth. They have spoken of her sense of duty, her wisdom, her kindness, her humour, how she touched the lives of hundreds of thousands of their constituents in her visits to every part of this country. Their words have been heartfelt. She sat in this historic hall, as you sit now, on many occasions. Some of those occasions were to celebrate milestones in her own reign. The addresses to celebrate her silver, golden, and diamond jubilees shared a common thread, that our constitutional monarchy is a symbol of stability in an ever-changing world. As Speaker Boothroyd said, Queen Elizabeth's wisdom and grace demonstrated for all to see the value of a constitutional monarchy in securing the liberties of our citizens and the fundamental unity of this kingdom and the Commonwealth. On other occasions, our late Queen was here to mark the historic moments, such as the 50th anniversary of the Second World War, a war in which she herself served in the armed forces. And in 1988, we celebrated the 300th anniversary of the revolutions of 1688 to 1689. It is perhaps very British to celebrate revolutions by presenting an address to Her Majesty. But those revolutions led to our constitutional freedoms, set out the foundation for a stable monarchy which protects liberty. In your first address to the nation, you recognised your life would change as a result of the new responsibilities. You pledge yourself to uphold constitutional principles at the heart of our nation. These are weighty responsibilities, as the early Queen Elizabeth said in her final speech to parliamentarians. To be a king and wear a crown is a thing more glorious to them that see it than it is pleasant that them that bear it. We know you hold the greatest respect, the precious traditions, the freedoms and responsibilities of our unique history and our system of parliamentary governance. We know that you will bear those responsibilities which fall to you with the fortitude, dignity demonstrated by Her late Majesty. When the House met at the Accession Council, my first symbolic act was to make the oath to be faithful and bear true allegiance to Your Majesty, King Charles. And so it is my duty to present our humble address to you, our new King, to express both our sorrow and loss of our Sovereign Lady and our confidence in the future in your reign. Most gracious Sovereign, we, Your Majesty's dutiful, loyal subjects, the Commons of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, in Parliament assembled, express deep sympathy felt by this House for the great sorrow which Your Majesty has sustained by the death of the late Queen, Your Majesty's mother. Extended to all the royal family the deep sympathy of this House in their grief, which is shared by all its members. Assure Your Majesty that Her late Majesty's unstinting dedication over a reign of over 70 years to the service of our great country and its people, and to the service of the countries and the peoples of the rest of the wider Commonwealth, which will always be held affectionate and grateful remembrance. And to express to Your Majesty our loyalty to you and our conviction that you will strive to uphold the liberties and to promote the happiness of the people in all your realms, now and in years to come.
The Speaker of the House of Commons there, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, parliamentarian since 1997, became the Speaker in November 2019, paused briefly to bow in front of the Queen Consort and then hand the humble address to the King. The King remains seated, hands the address to an official, and now rises to his feet and walks towards the gold lectern to address us.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, I am deeply grateful for the addresses of condolence by the House of Lords and the House of Commons, which so touchingly encompass what our late sovereign, my beloved mother, the Queen, meant to us all. As Shakespeare says of the earlier Queen Elizabeth, she was a pattern to all princes living. As I stand before you today, I cannot help but feel the weight of history which surrounds us and which reminds us of the vital parliamentary traditions to which members of both houses dedicate yourselves with such personal commitment for the betterment of us all. Parliament is the living and breathing instrument of our democracy. That your traditions are ancient, we see in the construction of this great hall, and the reminders of medieval predecessors of the office to which I have been called, and the tangible connections to my darling late mother we see all around us, from the fountain in New Palace Yard, which commemorates the late Queen's Silver Jubilee, to the sundial in Old Palace Yard for the Golden Jubilee, the magnificent stained glass window before me for the Diamond Jubilee, and so poignantly and yet to be formally unveiled, your most generous gift to Her late Majesty to mark the unprecedented Platinum Jubilee, which we celebrated only 3 months ago with such joyful hearts. The great bell of Big Ben, one of the most powerful symbols of our nation throughout the world, and housed within the Elizabeth Tower, also named for my mother's Diamond Jubilee, will mark the passage of the late Queen's progress from Buckingham Palace to this Parliament on Wednesday. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, we gather today in remembrance of the remarkable span of the Queen's dedicated service to her nations and peoples. While very young, Her late Majesty pledged herself to serve her country and her people, and to maintain the precious principles of constitutional government which lie at the heart of our nation. This vow she kept with unsurpassed devotion. She set an example of selfless duty, which, with God's help and your counsels, I am resolved faithfully to follow.
Presentations from the King to the two speakers, who now returns to his chair, and we await the national anthem.
King's bodyguard, shut up!
The Lord Great Chamberlain, dressed in red, bows in front of the King and the Queen Consort as they come down the half a dozen or so stone steps to the main central gangway of Westminster Hall. A smile emerging from the King as he pauses occasionally to acknowledge members of the audience who throughout the service were a sea of expressionless, thoughtful, contemplative faces. The King looking occasionally towards the speakers, Lord Macfall and Sir Lindsay Hoyle, occasionally towards the audience, occasionally the floor, the Queen Consort looking straight ahead throughout. But now, as I say, one or two smiles from the King and the Queen Consort. The two speakers are immediately behind the royal couple as they are led by the Lord Great Chamberlain towards the door and towards the exit. Again, some smiles and acknowledgements from the King and the Queen Consort as they head towards the back of Westminster Hall. Many of the assembled parliamentarians bowing as the King passes past them. And at this point, Martha, I return to you as the King and the Queen Consort head out of Westminster Hall shortly to depart Parliament.
Thank you, Chris. And we heard those tributes there, didn't we, from both speakers of Parliament. Lindsay Hoyle describing the Queen as a symbol of stability in an ever-changing world, and the new King himself talking about the remarkable span of the Queen's service and about this vow she kept, selfless duty, I am resolved faithfully to follow. Well, we can talk now to our royal correspondent, Johnny Diamond, who's in Edinburgh. And Johnny, I was struck, it's so difficult, isn't it, to lose a parent, however elderly, and for the King to be listening to those tributes. You could see how moved he was.
You could see how moved he was, and I think you could see how much he was thinking about what was being said to him. Again, both addresses from the Lord Speaker, from the Speaker, looking back on the long, long reign of Queen Elizabeth, and the King reciprocating as well, a brief but powerful reflection on the service that his late mother gave the nation, a second Shakespearean reference. We heard one in his address to the nation on Friday evening. Today, Shakespeare's description of Elizabeth I as a pattern to all princes living. And yes, you mentioned it, Martha, worth repeating. This vow she kept, he said, the vow of service she kept with unsurpassed devotion, an example of selfless duty that I am resolved to follow. As I say, brief but powerful and extremely thoughtful.
And an important message to parliamentarians too, when he talked about the weight of history and vital parliamentary traditions.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is a constitutional monarchy, and that he understands better than anybody else. But also he understands the role that he plays in connecting Parliament to its long, long historical tradition of representation. And that is what this was about. Part of what this was about is a reminder of the sovereignty of Parliament and the role that the sovereign plays in maintaining that as well.
And we're just watching him leaving the Palace of Westminster now, on his way to Edinburgh, because this is just the beginning of what will be a very grueling time physically, emotionally, and this is a man who's 74 shortly.
Yes, this is going to be a long day and an intense day. And as you say, quite a trying day. He makes his way from London, from central London to the RAF base at Northolt, west of the capital. He'll come up to Edinburgh and then starts a whole new set of ceremonies, both intensely personal, as he will walk behind the coffin of his mother as it makes its way from the Palace of Holyrood House to St Giles's Cathedral. He'll attend a service at the cathedral. He will meet political leadership here in Scotland, and then he'll return to the cathedral to begin the vigil that will take place around his mother's coffin. So this is a very busy, very intense, and no doubt very moving day, but also a day that is a reminder of the Crown's role in Scotland as well. it will be the crown of Scotland that is placed on his mother's coffin at St Giles Cathedral. And it is important for the crown that Scotland sees its king and that he is seen to be here and to be active here.
Johnny, many thanks. Well, let me turn to our other guests now. First of all, Professor Robert Hazel. And this really did feel like a moment imbued with history.
Yes, Martha, imbued with history. But as you said right at the top of this programme, we've seen history being made. There was no precedent for the new monarch to come to meet with Parliament so early in his reign. So we've seen a new tradition being made today. And so far as we know, it's a tradition made by King Charles. It was his wish to come himself to Parliament rather than receiving the humble address back in the palace, as has happened with all his predecessors. And I think I would expect that tradition to be continued when his turn comes by Prince William and by subsequent monarchs. So it has been a very historic moment. And as with so much in our Constitution, it's a wonderful blend of the ancient and modern. So those watching on television will have seen two officials who plan all the ceremonial events at Westminster, and they are the Lord Great Chamberlain, Lord Carrington, and she is now the Lady Usher of the Black Rod, the First Lady Usher, Sarah Clark. Now, Lord Carrington is a hereditary office holder. The Lord Great Chamberlain alternates between two families, the Cholmondeleys and the Carringtons, but Sarah Clark was appointed on merit as the First Lady Usher of the Black Rod 4 years ago, and previously she was Championships Director at Wimbledon. She was a sports administrator. So that's
there are parallels. I think you'd say that there are parallels, aren't there, in terms of the minutiae of these events. It's very, very difficult to organise. Let me bring in Peter Mandelson now, Lord Mandelson. And there were two aspects to the speeches from the parliamentarians. One, there was the motion of condolence and then the address, the expressions of loyalty to the King.
Loyalty to the King, but I think from Speaker Hoyle, also a fairly clear reminder of parliamentary sovereignty. And he did it in, I think, a perfectly good and respectful way, but the point was made nonetheless. And I think that, what King Charles is going to demonstrate is a great sense of the ideals and the principles of kingship, but also a high degree of adaptability. He's a thinking sovereign, and what he wants to do is to ensure that historic commitment to the institution of the monarchy and the great sort of sentiment that the general public have towards their sovereign moves with the times. And I think you'll see in a variety of small steps and incremental ways some small changes, some adaptability, so as to sort of re-cement that connection between sovereign and people, without, of course, excluding the sovereign Parliament.
And we've seen it actually in recent days, haven't we, with the televising of the Accession Council, where you were there, the televising of this event, this new event today as well. Let me bring in George Osborne now. And what are your thoughts on the King's speech?
Well, first of all, I agree with Peter that Lindsay Hoyle, which is exactly what the Speaker of the House of Commons should do, just a little bit of a kind of cheeky reminder to the King that Parliament is, the House of Commons is ultimately sovereign, because the event he referred to, this glorious revolution of 1688, is when the House of Commons got rid of one king, James II, and brought in another, William III. So, that is both true to Lindsay Hoyle's humour, but I think also there's sort of, the relationship between the House of Commons and the monarch is also one of there's a standing up for the rights of Parliament, which is symbolised in the state opening of Parliament when the royal representatives has their face confronted by a closed door and they come to summon Parliament.
Yes.
So I thought that was a good moment from the Speaker, and I think I thought Prince Charles's address was actually very straightforward. It was King Charles's address was very straightforward. I don't think it was the moment when he told us anything particularly new about how he would fulfill the role which he, I thought rather movingly, said he'd been called to. So I think we will have to wait and see on practice how, if anything, things evolve. But the British Constitution, as we've heard, is constantly evolving, of which this ceremony is itself an example. In fact, there didn't used to be a Lord's Speaker 10, 15 years ago, so we've managed to invent that post as well and made it look like it's been around for 1,000 years. And
this is one of the great gifts, isn't it, of British pageantry, to be constantly adapting, and then it appears as if it's been there from time immemorial.
Martha, you look at these things, you assume they've been going on since time immemorial, and then you discover they've, happened since like 1995 or something like that. But that is part of the genius, and I think what is quite remarkable is we have, of which this ceremony is an example. We have changed our head of state, and we do it unbelievably smoothly, and with great grace, and with great ceremony. And the whole thing happens in a kind of seamless way. Let's remember that when the Queen was alive, people were always speculating, it's going to be very difficult when she dies, and Prince Charles, as then was, is going to be hard for him to step into her shoes. And in some senses that's true, because she, of course, has sort of got such an incredible reputation, and in that sense is a hard act to follow. But actually things have gone so smoothly, and we just...
George, I can't help but...
That's a wonderful testament to him and to actually the British Constitution and how it works.
I can't help, George, but sort of make a reference and contrast with the recent history of the United States. The United States sort of elects their king every 4 years. And what we've just seen is an attempt by one president of the United States and their republic, to upset the smooth and ceremonial transfer of power from one president to another. I mean,
well, of course, it wasn't always...
Donald Trump's attempt to sort of usurp democracy and make himself a sort of dictator, would be unthinkable for a British king, which I think offers some testimony to the strength of our system.
But we did have a timely reminder from Lindsay Hoyle, didn't we? Robert Hazel, which George Osborne was referring to, was the glorious Revolution 1688, which was not so much a peaceful transfer of power. And in fact, he made the joke, didn't he? In no other country probably would you get a celebration of that event by having a royal address. But just remind us of why that was so important.
Well, it was a very peaceful transfer, Martha. Nobody was killed or even hurt, and that's part of the reason why it's called the Glorious Revolution. What happened was that King James II, who was a Catholic, was chased from the throne for that reason. And the crown was then offered to his daughter, Mary, and her husband, William of Orange. And so they came from the Netherlands to be joint sovereigns, William and Mary. And they then had no surviving children. And so only 10 years later, Parliament changed the laws of succession again in order to provide that future monarchs would be the descendants of the Electress of Hanover. Which was a Protestant family. At the time, Protestantism was seen as vital, in effect, to what we would now call our national security, because continental Europe was almost entirely Catholic. So that is the history of the Glorious Revolution, and two early illustrations of how the monarchy has been tightly regulated by Parliament ever since.
Thank you very much, Robert. Well, we can bring in now Dame Harriet Harman, who was one of the parliamentarians listening to those speeches in Westminster Hall. Good morning. And just tell us what that felt like for you.
Well, a very auspicious and historic and overwhelming occasion, and the moment at which the new king is there with his House of Commons and his House of Lords, because, of course, he is the constitutional monarch and we are his parliament, and the Queen had such a strong, close and clear relationship with the House of Commons that is for him to take forward.
I thought it was also rather touching and very much in character the way that he was, given his interest in architecture, but the way he was talking about the physical surroundings and why they meant so much to him and his mother. He talked about the tangible connections to my darling mother, the fountain and the sundial, and the things which you must see every day almost on your way to work.
Well, history is in every stone in this great hall and in all the timbers that arch above it. But as has been said, the Queen overarched a transition into modern Britain, and I think that he is the modern monarch now for the future, and I think we're all just going to give him 100% support to play that role as constitutional monarch in what is a very new and changing age.
It is something, isn't it, that we've taken for granted, that we've had a woman as head of state for all those years, but obviously that's about to change. Well, that has changed.
But during that time, I mean, it's very striking that at her accession council, when she was proclaimed monarch, she would have been the only woman there. And the 200 privy councillors, the members of the judiciary, the senior clerics, all the members of Parliament and the House of Lords would all have been, all those privy councillors would have been men. She would have been the one woman amongst all those men. And during those decades now, there are women and men in senior posts and indeed in all roles in this country. So I think that's been a very fundamental change. And although we revert to a male monarch, there are women in all posts.
And what do you think is likely to change under King Charles III? It was interesting, my guests here in the studio earlier were saying that they noticed with interest what the Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, was hinting at as standing up for parliamentary sovereignty.
Well, I think it is something that when Parliament has been denigrated over the decades, that the Queen was always absolutely solid and resolved in her commitment and support for Parliament. And I hope, and we all expect, that the King Charles will do the same, that he will play his own role, but part of his role is to support us to play ours, to underpin our democracy, but never to intervene in it.
And do you think, Peter Mandelson, that is something that the King does understand?
I think he understands it very well indeed. Look, he's a sort of referee in our parliamentary system, although very rarely called upon to blow the whistle on anyone. He's somebody who will never put a step out of place. He's not going to usurp centuries of history in our parliamentary system. But I think there's something else about him, and it brought home to me over the weekend and again this morning. I think we're going to see Team Charles. I think that his Queen Consort, Camilla, is going to play a very important role.
He talked about it at the Accession Council, didn't
he? Yes, he did, and she is by his side, and she's certainly not afraid of speaking truth unto power. And I think the other person you're going to see prominently in Team Charles is the new Prince of Wales, Prince William. He has a tremendous sense of, his role, but the world around him. He also has great sort of integrity and courage, and I think we're going to see that team playing together for years to come.
Thank you so much, Peter Mandelson, George Osborne, Harriet Harman and Robert Hazel. And this brings to an end the latest part of the formal proceedings of the week, but they'll continue this afternoon in Edinburgh when the King now travels to the Scottish capital for a service of thanksgiving for the Queen at St Giles Cathedral. You were able to hear that on Radio 4 Longwave and Radio 5 Live. From all of us here, though, good morning.
Martha Carney. And this afternoon we begin a new series in which 10 major novelists, historians and scholars, including Alan Bennett, Lady Antonia Fraser and Bernardine Evaristo, describe their experiences of the reign of the late Queen Elizabeth II. That starts at 1:45.
BBC News at 11 o'clock. In the past hour, King Charles has made his first address as monarch to MPs and peers in Parliament at Westminster Hall. He was accompanied by the Queen Consort. The King said his late mother, Queen Elizabeth, had vowed to serve her country and her people, and he would do the same.
This vow she kept with unsurpassed devotion. She set an example of selfless duty, which, with God's help and your counsels, I am resolved faithfully to follow.
The speakers of both houses also addressed those present and offered their condolences for Queen Elizabeth's death at Balmoral Castle on Thursday. The Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, spoke directly to the King.
We know you hold the greatest respect, the precious traditions, the freedoms and responsibilities of our unique history and our system of parliamentary governance. We know that you will bear those responsibilities which fall to you with the fortitude, dignity demonstrated by Her late Majesty.
Charles and Camilla, the Queen Consort, are now on their way to Edinburgh. The King will lead a procession of other senior members of the royal family behind Queen Elizabeth's coffin as it travels from the Palace of Holyrood House to St Giles Cathedral. Thousands of people are expected to line the Royal Mile. After a service of reflection and a vigil, members of the public will get the chance to process past the coffin for the first time. Prince Harry has paid his first public tribute to Queen Elizabeth, calling his late granny his guiding compass. The Duke of Sussex said he cherished all the special moments he had shared with her and said she was sorely missed, not just by him, but by the world over. Royal Mail says its services will be suspended next Monday for the late Queen's funeral. BBC News.
This is BBC Radio 4. On today's edition of The Frost Tapes, in half an hour, we'll trawl through David Frost's encounters with the man who survived the Blitz, fought in a war half a world away, and then reached dizzying heights of fame and fortune in Hollywood. That's coming up at 11:30. But now, the series that explores the search for diagnosis and all that comes after. Here's Helena Merriman with Room 5.
Nice again, please.
This is Room 5, when a diagnosis changes everything. Episode 4, Joelle. When Joelle was a child, he grew up thinking what most of us feel when we're little, that he was normal, that the way he experienced the world was just like everyone else.